My name is Greg, and welcome back to this Flipping Furniture. Today, we are continuing our video series on taking tips and tricks that woodworkers use in their daily build and transferring those tips and tricks into our furniture flipping so we can build stronger, sturdier furniture, more aesthetically pleasing, and we can flip at a quicker pace to increase our profits. So today we have an interesting video on sanding. Before I learned how to sand, I was always a little intimidated to put a piece of nice wood like this walnut here into any furniture flipping. And one way to learn how to sand properly is to make an end grain cutting board. And if you have not had the pleasure of sanding an end grain cutting board, it's a bit like sanding concrete. The end grain on this is just extremely tough, and it's hard to get a smooth surface on here. So I think I can do this. What I wanted to do as we get up to our 1,000 subscribers, if you would subscribe down below, and once we get to 1,000 subscribers, I'm going to make another walnut, maybe a little bit of maple, end grain cutting board, do a random drawing, and send this to the winner of that. So we'll make it a little bit larger. This is a little vegetable board that I made for snacks, cutting up vegetables, that sort of thing. But we'll make a little bit bigger one and send to the winner of that. When we talk about sanding, and for time's sake, I know watching someone sand endlessly is a lot of enjoyment, but we don't want to offer that much enjoyment here. So I reduced the size of this nice piece of walnut, and what I wanted to do was imagine that this is the top of a desk, maybe a kitchen island, something like that. So the tips and tricks that woodworkers use are, first, if you would go up and ask a woodworker for any tips on sanding, you'd probably get a roll of the eyes, possibly a grumble, and then a 2 to 3 hour conversation on how that particular woodworker gets just a glass smooth finish on any of the wood projects that they're doing. So what we're going to do today is talk about and demonstrate how we get just a high quality finish that when our customers touch the top of this, it feels like just a real quality piece of furniture. So in order to do that, we're going to need a couple of things. We need a sander. We need our safety equipment, our glasses, earmuffs, and a respirator. I'll probably skip the respirator for today's video. Oh, and I just realized my sleeves are not a fashion statement. I'll be working on the table saw later, so it's a little chilly in the shop today. And whenever I'll be cutting, I make sure that I have my sleeves cut. So what we're going to do is first talk about the grits of sandpaper. I think we're all pretty familiar that the lower the grit, say a 60 or an 80 grit, the coarser the grit, the rougher that it is. And as we go up through the grits to 60 to 80, 120, 180, 220, so on and so forth, the purpose of sanding projects, sanding wood, is to put scratches in your wood. Now that doesn't seem like it makes sense, but as you go up through the grits, those scratches get narrower, narrower, and narrower, which allow less stain to fall into those. So as those grooves get narrower, it takes less stain, and it actually makes it look just slightly lighter than if you would stay at an 80 or a 120 grit. So that's important a little bit later when we talk about the edge grain here. So what we're going to do, we're going to start off with our 60 grit sandpaper, and we're going to put that on here. And the key to this, and this is a pretty rough and gnarly piece of maple, but at the end we're going to see just how nice this grain is in this piece of wood. And to accomplish a nice, smooth, and quality finish, we're going to need a pencil, a sander, an air hose, hopefully with a attachment on it, And what we're going to do, just with medium pressure, we're going to take this pencil and put pencil marks all over the top of what we need to sand. And again, imagine this is a shelf that you put into one of your pieces of furniture, maybe the top of a desk, kitchen island, something like that. And we're going to take our 60 grit of sandpaper and just in smooth fluid motions, go over the sandpaper. We're not going to hit the high spots like this. It'll leave a groove. And one way to ruin a real quality finish is to have some grooves in there. Might look nice in certain areas, and when you get it inside and the light hits it, it just stands out like a sore thumb. So we are going to just smooth, even passes throughout here. When we're done, we're going to look and see if we have any pencil marks remaining. If there are pencil marks remaining, we do not change the grit. We come back through with the pencil and then sand until this 60 grit has a nice smooth finish. So let's go ahead and do that now. Okay, that is all we want to do on that initial pass with the 60 grit. And you will see that there's plenty of pencil marks remaining, but yet in some areas the pencil marks are gone. So we do not have a flat piece of wood yet. So we're going to take our pencil and go back over it. All right, not sure it'll show on camera, but there are a few pencil marks remaining, so we once again do not have a flat, uniform, level piece of wood. We're going to do this one more time. All right, all the pencil marks are gone on this 60 grit of sandpaper. So what we're going to do, take our air nozzle and blow off if any of those granules from that came off. We don't want that on the higher grit, so we're just gonna take a little bit of air, remove all of the marks, and now we are ready to go up in grit. So we will take our 60 grit, move on up to 80. Put our pencil marks back on. Just with medium pressure. And we repeat the process. And notice we're starting the sander with it on the wood. Okay, transitioning up to the 80 grit, sometimes you get lucky, sometimes you don't. All the pencil marks are removed. So with the 60 and the 80 grit, we have a just smooth, flat surface. Now we're ready to go up into the higher grit and put just more of a finish sheen on this, so the sheen looks better, I should say. So we're going to take our air. Again, if any of the granules from the 80 grit fell off, we don't want them on here. Now, after the 80 grit, there's real no need for any more pencil marks because you're not really removing any material with the 120 and higher. You're just kind of narrowing those grooves just a little bit so they're not as deep as with this coarse sandpaper. So we will move right up to 120. And again, same even, smooth passes, not going over the edge to round off the edges, just consistent motion. All right, if you plan on painting your material, you're good at 120. You can go up to 180 if you want, but the thicker paint is going to cover all of those little scratches and you'll have a nice smooth surface. If you're gonna move on to more of a stain, an oil penetrating stain, you'll probably wanna go up to 180. Sometimes I even go to 220. And I think we'll just go up one more grit to 280, and then stay tuned. We're going to talk about what popping the grain is. So we will take our 120 and we will go up to 180. All right, two things now that we're at 180 grit, we can be considered done here right before we pop the grain. If you've ever felt a piece of wood that has a little bit of a fuzzy feel to it, maybe even an end grain cutting board, that the grain has not been popped, when you put water on wood that has been sanded, the fibers kind of stand up a little bit. And we need to get the wood to have those fibers stand up to knock them down so they're smooth. Especially if you're going to use a water-based anything, that moisture in there will make that grain, the grain fibers, stand up, and it'll have that fuzzy feeling, and it won't have a high quality finish feel to it. So all it requires is just to take some water and doesn't take a lot, just enough to get the board wet. And then the other bonus to this is if you have any glue on your board, it will show up pretty easily here. But it also allows you to take a look at the grain, what it's going to look like with some stain on it. So from this point here, you can dry it with the heat gun, regular air, or let it air dry. I'll take the air hose and clean it off so you can see the difference. All right. If you could rub your hand on this, you would feel the fuzzy kind of nature of those wood fibers standing up. And we'll see when we watch this video back, but you can probably also see it has a little bit of a whiter hue to it maybe, and that's from those fibers standing up. So this is pretty well dry, but what we'll do from here is put our 180 back, and then we'll go ahead and sand it up to 220, and then we'll talk about the difference between the face grain or the long grain and the edge grain. If you've ever looked closely on a piece of furniture, sometimes the sides, the edge grain, appears to be darker than the top of the surface, and we'll talk about why that is here in a minute. Give the compressor a minute to shut off. The compressor has shut off. So we're going to talk about the long grain or the face grain now as compared to the edge grain. You probably have seen on furniture before on the tops, this here appears to be a little bit darker than what's on top. And sometimes it's barely noticeable and sometimes it stands out a lot. And now that you know that, you'll probably notice it anymore. And here's a way you can fix that. Instead of adjusting your tint, if you sand this to say 180, also sand the edges in the same process up to 180. And then on your next grit, only sand this to 220. And what that does is it narrows those scratch marks like we talked about earlier and does not allow as much stain to get in there. So it does not only appear lighter, it is lighter. So that's a good way to even out both of your surfaces so the hue and the color is very similar. So that's our sanding tip of the day. Don't forget, subscribe down below to get into the drawing for a nice edge grain cutting board. And thank you for watching today.